I was a material atheist for the entire first 2/3, maybe 3/4 of my life. And for a while there, I was fairly militant about it. And I said all the same things that they say, and I felt all the same things that they feel. And this is why I can't stand guys like Bill Hicks, because I hear this scathing contempt, like, how stupid do you have to be to believe in a talking snake and a giant guy with a beard who lives in the clouds? How stupid do you have to be to believe that? And then I used to think, yeah. Now I think, hold on now, dude, you're living in an 11-dimensional universe with a spectrum of wavelengths that we can see. Just it's like we look at the universe through a cocktail straw, and we are folded into dimensions. A flatlander, a joker on a 2-dimensional card cannot see or imagine the 3rd-dimensional world, and then take that up another 7 steps, and you have some idea of how limited your perception is. And by the way, it doesn't matter how well informed you are limited by the processing power of the gray cantaloupe of jelly up in your head. You only have so many neurons, so many connections, and you can only be so smart. And that's not a question of, gee, there's things that you didn't learn, or if an alien was to come by and give you all of the answers. No, there are things that you simply cannot get your head around. And I can understand that I cannot get around it, and that gives me an insight to them that you don't have. I still don't understand it, but I can see its shadow on the wall of the cave much more clearly than you do. And a great example of this is, is like time. Time. I've really become quite convinced that time is just, in a very real sense, time does not exist. It is a perceptional. I had the perfect word. Artifact. It's a perceptional artifact of this particular dimension. We're moving through the 4th dimension, and we perceive it as time, but we're really 4-dimensional worms. Every movement I've ever made in the earth is, if I drive my car back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, I'm just an object that basically does this upward zigzag because of moving back and forth through the 4th dimension of time, and I'm moving it through time at the rate of 1 minute per minute. And when you think about how much space there is, and how much space there is, just how big space is in 3 dimensions, you think about if this universe of ours was 2 dimensions instead of a giant sphere. Let's just say it was a flat circle. How much less stuff would there be in there? A lot less. If it was an infinitely thin, that'd be virtually nothing. So we are a bubble in a 4th-dimensional time space, and that's a bubble in a 5th and a 6th and a 7th and 8th and so on. But none of that really matters, because the one thing that would really you have to be very close-minded to not see the power of what I'm about to say. When you get into quantum, the universe behaves in such a strange way that your materialistic, atheistic view of the world that you're quite convinced is the be-all and end-all, which is the world where you have a flask and you fill it full of hydrogen, helium, methane, and ammonia, pass a spark through it, and amino acids start sliding down the side, and then you say, therefore, we've got it all figured out. There's nothing else to know. That's how I spent most of my life, and that's how these people think. It's how Dawkins thinks. It's how Patton Oswalt thinks, and Bill Hicks thinks. All of it. They think it's all just they think the whole thing is just superstition and mental weakness. But what do you say to these people, and what do you say to yourself when you discover that turning a camera on or watching an experiment changes the outcome? What do you say about that? And it's not up for discussion. This is just proven every day. Cell phones function on these same kind of uncertainty principles. What do you say when the act of looking at something makes it become something? If you decide to look at something and there's a couple of slots and you're passing a beam of light through it, it behaves like particles until you look at it, then it behaves like waves. And a particle that may not have, that's connected to another particle that's not enmeshed. Anyway, these 2 particles that are like antiparticles of each other, and one's over here and the other one's on the other side of the universe, and you look at it in such a way as you determine its charge, this one's positive, then the other one instantly becomes negative. It travels faster than the speed of light. It's instantaneous. As a matter of fact, they've got pretty big error bars around it, but they did the experiment over a country the size of Switzerland that were separated by, I don't know, maybe 60, 80 kilometers, something like that. But we have such a supremely sophisticated time measuring systems that they were able to apply this experiment, and they were able to find out that the other particle flipped, and even though it was only 90 kilometers away, they were able to determine that the speed at which that signal traveled had to be at least 17 times the speed of light. It may be instantaneous. They knew it could be as fast as instantaneous, but it couldn't be slower than this. This was the slowest. How do you explain that? How do you explain it? And the logical outcome of this is, if I've got this little monkey brain here, I got a cantaloupe size of entangled. Thank you, Matt. If I've got this cantaloupe size piece of jelly up here, and it's allowed me to do amazing things as a species, build jet airplanes and understand on some level models of how the actual universe works that are predictive, and it's magnificent. It's a miracle. What if I had a brain the size of a city bus, or Everest? If my ability to observe nature with this little monkey brain affects nature, if the act of observing something changes it, creates an outcome, the technical term is you're compressing the probability waves. All of these quantum states exist in a state of probability until they're observed, at which point, when they're observed, they have to make a decision. You're actually compressing randomness and chaos into making a decision of a certain kind of observable reality. So what do you say? What do you say, Dawkins or Marr or the rest of you, when I tell you that a human being is capable of modifying the universe by observing it? You modify it. You change it by observing it. It's the consciousness. The consciousness is what is, in fact, changing the structure of the universe. And what do you say when people have a pretty compelling argument to make that the universe is not made out of matter or energy or gravity? It's made out of information. The substructure of space-time is information. And the more information there is, the more complex the universe becomes. And it just behaves that way. What if if you can get past the idea of time, if you can get past the idea of before or after, you can make a very compelling case that the universe didn't create life. It's life that created the universe. That as the consciousness changed and evolved and became more powerful, it made more and more of these observations, compressed more and more of these probabilities into actual decisions, and the universe becomes more sophisticated the more we look at it. And the deeper we look at it, the more sophisticated it becomes, because we're forcing it to make a decision. And this happens. I'm not making this up. This part of it up to here is 100% proven. I mean, this is why cell phones work. The universe exists in a quantum state that is neither here nor there, and the act of observing it makes it make a decision. And we know this is true. So if we can do this with our puny little electron microscopes and our particle colliders and our monkey cantaloupe brains, what if you had a level of consciousness that was 1,000 times the human level of consciousness? What kind of observations could you make? And is it possible that if you had a large enough consciousness, could you not simply make a series of observations in such a way that you could have something created out of nothing? That you would simply observe particles or have a conscious interaction with these sea of particles, and having that kind of intelligent sophistication that we simply don't have, you had the ability to simply put something together using the power of the observation. And you could say, let there be light, and there would be light. Not so arrogant as I used to be. I'm really not. And it's so interesting. And Thomas Henbury here says, so life made the universe, so what made life? And this is like the chicken and the egg argument. But that's the great argument, right? Did life create the universe, or did the universe create life? And my response to you, Thomas, from my limited but opening perspective would be, the way you phrase that question indicates that you have not gotten over the idea of time. You've assumed that one of them comes before the other one, and Any rational person will say, well, obviously something comes before the other one. But it's not. It's not obvious. If I drop a glass on the floor and it shatters, we can look at that as say that's a process and it's an irreversible process. But through the fourth dimension of time, that little spline of the glass is a physical structure, like this microphone. It's just a four-dimensional physical structure of a glass that's existed all the way through the time, and it ends up on the floor, and it's just a giant funnel thing moving through the fourth dimension. And then you'd say, well, what was there before that? Nothing. Well, what will it turn into, this four-dimensional spline? Nothing. Well, what do you mean? It must have started. No. Well, something must have been there before all this. No, it's always been there. It's always been there. This structure is like imagine like a gigantic coral reef of probabilities and observations and all of this stuff. It's an infinitely complex series of roots and branches and so on. Well, how did it start? Well, one end of it was a point, and the other end of it may be an infinitely large funnel. But when you say one end of it, you can say that the point started here, but compared to what? I mean, from here to here is what? Is that 5 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 50 million years, 50 billion years, 50 trillion years? You see what I'm saying? There is no beginning. There's no beginning and no end. And this is the point I'm trying to make. I'm so glad you came up with that question, Thomas, because this is the point I'm trying to make. This is, in fact, the exact point I'm trying to make. We don't have the processing power. We don't have the horsepower. We don't have the horsies. We do not have the horsies to really genuinely understand infinity and eternity. We know what they mean, but we can't understand them. We can work with the concept enough to do incredible physics and stuff, but we simply cannot understand it. We don't have the neurons to understand it in a way that would make any sense. We acknowledge it as a possibility, but we don't understand it. It's almost impossible to get rid of this idea of time, and I've trained myself to do it, which is why when you said, well, did life create consciousness or did consciousness create life? And I started thinking about that in terms of this reality that I've always grown up in, and then I just realized, no, it's a four-dimensional structure, and there is no beginning or end of it. It's just a better way to think of this is, I think a better way to think of this, Thomas, is if I gave you an LP, which most kids don't even know what that is. If I gave you an LP and I told you to put it on a record player, and I said, put it on the record, put it on the part of record that's real, you would think I'm nuts. You would say, well, put it on the part of the record that's in the now. You could put the needle down on the beginning of the first track on the outside. That's what most people would do, but you could put the needle down on the inside of the fifth track. You could put the needle down on the very inside. The needle is your perception, but the record doesn't change. The record doesn't flow. The record is the record. And the needle is your consciousness, and the needle moves through this structure, and you hear the song as the needle moves. But the interesting thing about that is, as we all know, being little kids ruining our parents' stereos, you can put the needle down wherever you want to. You can knock the needle so that entire lyric misses, or several beats, or an entire song. You just knock it over, and a song that should be there in sequence is not heard because the needle didn't cross that. You can put the needle down anywhere you want to, and you can spin the record backwards. And the record does not become any less real if you go down there and just crank it backwards like you did when you were a kid. The record's not less real, and the needle's not less real, but it is moving backward in time on some level that we can understand. That we've got the horsies for. We can look at a record, hear it play in real time, an old LP, and we can understand. We can pick up and move it over here, and we can do that, and we can do this, and we can run it backwards, run it forwards. We can move anywhere we want to on it, and we also can say that there's no part of this record that's more real than the rest of it. There's only the place where the needle is at the time, and if the needle's not there, then the thing is still there. It doesn't matter whether somebody's watching it or not. That we can understand. We can't really understand. We can take that analogy and look at it in terms of, now we look at it in four dimensions, And it gives us a shadow on the wall of what it really is. It's not really what it is, but it gives us a shadow on the wall. By the way, how many of you, some people are really interested in maps. I've always been fascinated by maps. Google Earth is just amazing. You just zoom in on anything, you zoom in anywhere on the planet. So how many of you think you really know your home state? If I were to give you a map of the state of Texas, let's say, and if I gave you a map, a really big map of the state of Texas, you would say, well, what is? I said, what is this? You say, it's Texas. Well, how do you know it's Texas? Well, duh. I mean, there's El Paso, and here's Interstate 10, and here's Houston, and here's San Antonio up at here's Lubbock. It's obviously Texas. It's not Texas. It's a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper with markings on it. It's not Texas. Texas consists of trillions of particles of sand and billions of bugs and lizards and trillions of air molecules that are interacting with the whole thing. And Texas is radiation received from the sun. And Texas you couldn't understand a square inch of Texas if you really got down to it. So when you say this map is Texas, you're saying I am moving a pretty far way away from the reality of what Texas actually is into a useful model that I can, in fact, process, because I can't process what Texas really is. I've driven through Texas a bunch. I've driven through Texas a bunch, and it's 11 hours at 60 miles an hour. So for me, it's probably 5 hours. But you can go through Texas in the day and the nighttime at 70, 80 miles an hour and be there for hours and hours and hours and hours. And every single second of that time, you are crossing over entire universes. I don't mean like little capsule universes. I mean, you're passing up God knows how many lizards and how many gopher holes, and you're on a road. I mean, Texas keeps going on either side, not just forward and backwards. There's more Texas to the left and to the right. So you have a map of Texas, but you don't really have Texas. It's useful. It's the reason we have a map is because it's useful. It can get me from one end of real Texas to another end of real Texas where I want to go. But it's not Texas. And so this is why they say the map is not the territory. And when you understand that the map is not the territory, then you stop with this arrogance of, oh, I've got it completely sorted out. It's impossible that there's a man with a beard up in the sky. It's just physically impossible. It's just ridiculous to believe in it. Well, if there's a consciousness that's sophisticated enough, how would you describe it? How would it want to be described by, how would it want to be perceived? What would you call it? You know, if you're coming out of a mud skipper and you're on your way up to the pinnacle creation, which would be, well, I don't know, some kind of conservative internet pundit or some kind or something. And let's say you're somewhere on the spectrum of these two things. And how do you perceive of this? What else are you going to come up with? It may be a simplistic view of God, but I don't think any real thinking Christian or religious person thinks that God's form as described is this bearded guy in the clouds. I don't think anybody thinks that's the limit of what he is. It's just how it's useful to think of him. It's useful to think of a map of Texas as Texas. It's useful to think of an LP as a model for four-dimensional space, but the LP is not four-dimensional space, and the map of Texas is not Texas, and the picture of the guy in the sky is not the essence of what the guy in the sky is. Now, doesn't mean there is a God, but it certainly means that you can't exclude one. There's evidence. People always ask, is there evidence of God? And I would have said no. And then I realized once there was evidence that observation and consciousness could change the physical world, then I think it's almost inevitable. And when you say, well, and again, Dawkins, who should know better, will say, well, if you postulate God instead of the Big Bang, you've got the same problem. Who created God? Dawkins will literally say, who did God evolve from? And who created God? My response to that is nobody. He's always been there. Well, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter how long he's been there. There must have been a time before he existed. No. Understand? No. There was no time before he existed. There's no time afterwards. There is no, it doesn't, we can't process it. We cannot process it. You cannot process the idea that the Big Bang was there, and which plenty of evidence that actually happened. So there's this Big Bang, and you know what happened? We're so sophisticated, and these little cantaloupes have gotten so good, and all of us working together and building up on the shoulders of other giants, that we can now figure out what actually the universe looked like. I think it's some incredible thing. It's absolutely something incredible. It's something like we can go to about 100,000th of a second of what the universe looked like after the Big Bang, but we can't get past is it the Planck limit? It's something. Is it just one area? We just can't go further than that. But it's amazing that we can think back of it. But the point is, you would think, okay, so there's the flash of light, and then you think, well, what was before the flash of light? What was it doing before it blew up? And this is when you run into what this thing can process. It stops here. It just says, we don't have the RAM. I'm sorry, we're out of RAM. What was there before it? It's a ridiculous question. Why? There's nothing there before it. It's always been there. But there must have been something before it. No, you're looking at a map of Texas. You're not looking at Texas. It's always been there. So who created it? It didn't. No one created it. You're saying it created itself? I'm saying the act of making something is something that takes place through time. And there is no time. So no, it's always been there. It always will be there. And what's the problem? The problem is we can't deal with it. We just don't. We run up against the limitations of the neurons. We run up against the limitations of the processing speed in the RAM. We're out of RAM and we're out of CPU, and that's it. And if you recognize that, and if you recognize how far you're able to go with this little jelly cantaloupe, it's astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing. You should just get down on your knees and just be grateful for the miracles that we can accomplish with these little monkey brains of ours. Absolutely miracles. Forget the engineering miracles. The fact that we can make an experiment that determines the quantum state of entanglement with a particle. That's just the fact that we could come up with a model, because it's only a model, but it's a model that does some predicting of what happens on a level that's so far away from our consciousness. We were able to do this just through sheer intellectual horsepower. When Albert Einstein, certainly relativity, I think is without question the single greatest intellectual achievement ever. When Albert Einstein is sitting there bored in a patent office in Bern, I guess it was, Switzerland, he has got some time on his hands, so he imagines, if I'm driving a car at the speed of light and I turn on the headlights, what happens? And if I'm in an elevator that's going upward through space, I'm weightless, but I'm in an elevator, and elevator's accelerating upward at a rate of 1g, so that I've got a 1g field on me. Would I ever know the difference? And what happens? Does that ever stop? If I just keep accelerating at 1g, do I accelerate to infinite speed? No, it turns out you don't. And to just sit there, with a piece of paper and that mind, and use logic to determine the theory, and then use observation to determine that this magnificent piece of thinking was actually true. I'm sure most of you know this, but the evidence of relativity, the thing that really put relativity away was, according to relativity, if relativity is correct, then gravity is simply bent space-time, that the gravity field of the sun distorts the actual space around it, and therefore the light of stars behind the sun should be bent by that gravity. How do you prove that? Well, we know where stars are relative to each other with a high degree of accuracy. And if it turns out that you're in the right place during an eclipse, and for a few moments you're able to observe stars that are behind the sun, you find out, I have to phrase this carefully, you find out that the relationship of stars to each other, their relative positions in the sky, which are constant and haven't changed in all of human history, they change very, very slowly. We know this number, the distance between these two things, we know to a very high degree of precision, because we look at it in the night sky every night and we got this absolutely down. As it turns out, when the sun moves in front of those planets, when the Earth rotates around so that the sun is in front of the background stars, and the moon rotates in such a way as to block the sunlight just for a few minutes, you find out that distance changes, that it gets smaller, because the light of that star has actually been bent around the sun, the gravitational lens. And when they found out that the stars not only moved, their positions relative to each other not only appeared to move because of the gravity of the sun, They also appeared to move in a direction and the magnitude that was predicted by the theory. Now you know you got something. You've just broken off a huge piece of how things work. And what do you say about that kind of achievement? People are always putting humans down. Well, it's going on and on tonight. I guess it's okay. We haven't done a 3-hour show in a long time. I'm just tired of people putting down humans and, oh, we're cancer on the earth and we're the worst thing that ever happened, and if we just leave, the earth will be fine, and so on and so forth. No. I remember I was in anthropology class at the University of Florida. I was a freshman, and some anthropology teacher was talking about that. And he was saying, how many of you think, that humans are like these killer apes, and that, we're really just filled with violence, and that we're really just terrible? And most of the class raised their hand. I might have, I don't remember. He said, it was one of these gigantic classes for freshmen, He says, well, let's see, we're looking around here. We got about 250 people, 250 humans sitting next to each other almost in direct physical contact, sitting next to each other in absolute silence, completely under control. What other animals do you think you could pack that closely together and get this result? I thought, holy crap, he's right. If you put 250 gorillas next to each other that close, you'd have some real problems. And the same is true for packing in, anything that close. We're just kicking ass here. So anyway, and now here we are. We're sitting in I'm sitting in a room with a couple of lights and a camera, and there's cables that go to hard drives, and these things get connected to fiber optic lines, and then it shows up in your house a few minutes or a few seconds after I say it, which doesn't mean it happens a few seconds after I say it. It just means it's further in that direction, because I've already said it. I've always said it. Everything I've ever said, I've always said. It's always been there, and it always will be. It's kind of encouraging in a way. This whole structure is what we're experiencing is time. You don't know what I'm going to say next. Turns out I'm going to say Nebuchadnezzar. But that word was built into the universe before I started, and then the needle just went past it, and the needle could go back, and the needle get picked up. We just don't have the ability to do it. By the way, this guy who I love so much, who does Imagining the 10th Dimension, he says, so well, then that's definite indication that there's such a thing as fate. If the universe is a 4-dimensional structure that has always been there and always will be there, and that what is going to happen has always happened, then your future is limited. There's no such thing as free will. And his response is no. The free will is built into it. Well, that doesn't make any sense. What was there before you came along? You see, there you are with this before and after again. All of the decisions made by all of the people and all of these little splines and all this other stuff, it's constructed, and it's always been there. It always will be. And the choices that happen are not predetermined by anybody. We make them, but even that's still running up against the limit, because free will was built into the structure. My free will, my ability to not know what I'm going to say next, and the ability to just simply make a decision, was built into the structure. It came baked into it, and all of my free will decisions, which are free will decisions, weren't determined by anybody other than the choices I make. But those choices and those decisions have always been there. They always will be there, and they were there when the thing was created, and it never was created. It's always been there. Somebody said, somebody asked if they could get some books or anything to read about this. I haven't read an awful lot of books about it, but I've said this many times. I think absolutely the most amazing thing I've ever seen on the internet is called Imagining the 10th Dimension. And if you go find Imagining the 10th Dimension, try and see the older version of it, but it's about an 8-minute deal, and it is done with animation, and it is so astonishingly well thought out and so simple that I genuinely feel that I can see through a cocktail straw the dimmest reflection of a shadow of what this thing might look like. I thought they did a good job in that with Inception, by the way, that library in Inception, that 4-dimensional library with him moving through the 4th dimension. All these views down onto 3-dimensional world. I thought it was very cleverly done, especially cleverly done when you think about the fact that they're portraying the 4th dimension not in 3 dimensions, but actually in 2. You got a flat screen up there. And the idea that a tesseract, a hypercube, if you had a plastic model of a tesseract, imagine like a cube, and then there's like flanges that come out, and then it's embedded in a bigger cube. So it's like a cube within a cube. And what has been well said about this is that if you take a cube and you cast a shadow on a flat plane, you are casting a two-dimensional shadow of a three-dimensional object. And this tesseract is a three-dimensional shadow of a fourth-dimensional object. If you have the right amount of imagination, if you look at the bottom of that cube, there's an intersection on the corner of the cubes where the cube goes. There's length, there's width, and there's height, and then there's another direction coming out at right angles to the other three. It's not really there, obviously, because it would take a four-dimensional object to do that. But if you look at it, Interstellar, sorry, not Inception, thank you. It's always nice to be corrected on these little simple mistakes. You can look at a tesseract, hold it in your hands, and you can imagine that now you have four axes that are perpendicular to each other. They're not. It's an optical illusion, but you can imagine it. You can see a little bit about where that dimension would be. By the way, if you go to 7 minutes, somebody says 7 minutes now to break the longest show record. 7? Well, if it was 15, I'd stick around, but it's 7. I think I'll do 7 more minutes. So what is the total time I got? It's amazing to me that anybody's still awake through all this stuff. We've done 2 hours and 47 minutes of record time. Really? Holy crap, that just now hit me. Nearing recording limit. Please click stop recording and save your recording on the server soon. You know what? Rather than losing this and going for the record, because Ustream has changed, I'm going to there's a 3-hour limit on Ustream, I think. So, and besides, if I break the record now, then there'll be no chance to try to do it in the future. I don't want to lose the show. It does say save it, so I'm going to save it. You know what? Records are made to be broken or not broken. We'll worry about the length of it anyway. It's all about quality. And by the way, when you say this is the longest Stratosphere Lounge ever, or had a chance to be, see, there you go with your little time thinking again. The longest Stratosphere Lounge has always been the longest Stratosphere Lounge, always will be the longest Stratosphere Lounge. We just don't know whether we've seen it yet or not, whether the needle's passed over it. Maybe in front of us, maybe behind us, but either way, it's not here. So there we go. All right, that'll do it for